white smoke still curling, firefighters rolling up hoses. And the HOA president walked straight up to Alex, a trembling dog in hand, looked toward the dying flames, then said, "I know it's a bit early, but that eyesore is finally gone." President of the Maplewood Drive HOA, 7 years running, no one ever pushed back. Alex, the next-door neighbor, holding the Thompsons' dog to keep it calm, stood staring at the wreckage, then turned to her, voice steady. "Early? I can't understand how someone could think that while watching a neighbor lose their home." She shrugged, walked across the waterlogged lawn, like stepping out of a meeting that ended right on schedule. Across the street, barely 10 feet away, Dan Thompson stood clutching a tissue box and a file box, the only things he'd managed to grab. Lisa stood behind him, one arm locking the older child, the other pulling the younger one close. The older kid kept staring at the smoldering house. The younger one pulled her mother's collar over her face. No one said a word. That family had endured 18 months of fines totaling $3,400 for tree branches extending 6 inches past the property line, for fence paint 1 shade off the approved palette. But no one fined them for the water-damaged roof they weren't allowed to fix. Those kids grew up in the first home their family ever owned and lost it to an electrical short. I read this story at midnight and I wasn't angry. I just sat still for a long time. "Hey everyone." 8 words, spoken right in front of a still glowing fire. That's the line that kept me awake. And by the time I finished reading, I understood why. The HOA president looked at a burning house and called it an eyesore that's finally gone. 12,000 comments in 48 hours. One person wrote, "I thought I'd already met every kind of person." I hadn't. Another, "Nobody is born without empathy. You have to practice losing it." But here's the part I kept sitting with. How long had she been doing this? And were the Thompsons her first target? If you've ever lived under an HOA that made you feel watched down to the inch, stay. Because there were 2 other families pushed out before the Thompsons, and one denied application, signed, dated, exactly 1 month before the fire, will answer that question. Biscuit, the dog trembling in Alex's arms that night, would be the first living thing to run through the front door of a brand new house 9 months later. Painted deep cobalt blue, the color the HOA once banned. The night of the fire, Dan and Lisa Thompson stood on the sidewalk in their pajamas, staring at what was left of their roof. What they had in their hands, each other, 2 kids, and a dog named Biscuit. No luggage, no documents, nothing. The house at 14 Maplewood Drive wasn't the most expensive on the street. It never was. Dan was a biomedical equipment maintenance technician. Lisa taught 3rd grade. They bought the house after 7 years of saving, the kind of saving where you count every expense, every month, cut every non-essential until one spring morning you have enough to sign a purchase agreement. Biscuit, the chubby golden dog with big floppy ears, was what the 2 kids had pooled their birthday money for almost a year to adopt. He slept at the foot of the older child's bed. The night of the fire, he was the first one awake. In the 2 years the Thompsons lived on Maplewood Drive, they weren't well known, not in a bad way, in the way that they simply lived. Mowed the lawn, waved to neighbors at the mailbox, drove the kids to school. The kind of neighbors whose names you can't quite remember, but whose absence you'd feel if they moved away. But someone remembered their name, very clearly, even before they moved in. Margaret Voss, president of the Maplewood Drive HOA, the kind of person whose entire personality fit on a business card and whose compassion was about the same font size. Margaret ran the neighborhood like a luxury brand, no tolerance for wrong labels, misaligned packaging, or substandard products. The products, in this case, were other people's homes. She kept a tape measure in her jacket pocket at all times, a clipboard, a $150 pair of sunglasses she wore on Saturday morning patrols. Neighbors on the street knew the sound of her engine the way they knew their alarm clocks. When the silver Lexus began slowing down in front of someone's yard, that someone started mentally reviewing what they might be in violation of. Before the HOA even existed on Maplewood, Margaret had already called city code enforcement twice to report the Thompsons for having a guest car parked overnight in their driveway. She didn't live on the same block. She had to drive over to see it. There was a Mrs. Henderson, 71 years old, at the end of the street, who had a set of cream-colored porch chairs she'd bought when her kids were small. That set wasn't on the HOA Exterior 2022 approved color list. Margaret sent a violation notice on May 3rd. Mrs. Henderson called to ask about it. Margaret listened, said, "You know the process," hung up. Mrs. Henderson didn't call back. She sold the chairs a month later, and Mrs. Henderson wasn't the only one. $3,400 in fines. That's how much HOA records showed the Thompsons had been fined, over 18 months, for tree branches extending 6 inches beyond the property line, for fence paint 1 shade off the approved palette, a shade only distinguishable when inspected up close with a flashlight, for Dan's brother's car parked in the driveway 2 nights over Christmas. In the violation notices, the word eyesore appeared 4 times. The word blight appeared twice, all in motions proposed by Margaret. The language she used in administrative documents and the language she used in front of the fire that night, so identical that reading them back to back felt like reading from the same script. 3 weeks after the fire, Alex joined the HOA board. No one objected, simply because no one wanted extra unpaid work in an organization whose meetings usually took place in someone's kitchen with cold coffee and cookies from a tin. Margaret sent an email saying she was busy with family matters. 4 years of running the neighborhood, and she couldn't spare one Tuesday evening to welcome a new member. Alex noted that. In the first week, Alex requested access to the archived violation records for every house on the street. These were public records. Under state HOA law, any member had the right to review them. The records keeper, a board member named Ralph, looked at Alex for a moment, then handed over the binder, asked nothing more. Alex brought it home, opened it on the kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night. The Thompson file, a separate clip, thicker than all the rest. 31 violation notices in 18 months. 5 notices in 2 weeks of October last year, the month when, as Alex knew, Lisa Thompson had just had emergency appendix surgery. Then, at the very end of the clip, clipped on the outside, a different sheet, different color, different form. Not a violation notice, it was a repair approval application. Dan Thompson submitted it on September 14th of the previous year. Content: request to repair the roof. The northeast section was leaking during rainy season, with suspected risk of water infiltration into the electrical system. Attached, a contractor's quote for $4,200. Attached, photos of the damaged area. Upper right corner of the form, a red stamp. Denied. Does not meet HOA aesthetic standards. Date signed, September 21st. Date of the fire, October 22nd. 29 days. Alex set the form down on the table, didn't close it, stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. Margaret R. Voss, President. The next morning, Alex called the fire department and requested a copy of the fire investigation report, a public record. The report arrived 3 days later by email, 18 pages. Alex printed it out, moved the water glass aside, read from page 1. Pages 1 through 5, technical data, scene diagrams, firefighting equipment logs. Alex didn't skip a single line. Page 6, Alex's finger stopped. The preliminary ignition source has been identified at the junction between the electrical system and the roof structure on the northeast side. Evidence indicates long-term water infiltration leading to corrosion of the wire insulation. Alex read that paragraph again. Shoulders dropped. Not in relief, the kind of drop that comes when you've just confirmed something you were hoping wasn't true. Then opened the laptop. Called the contractor Dan Thompson had originally contacted. The number was on the denied application. Didn't explain why, just asked, based on the September quote, how would the contractor rate the risk level for that area? High risk. I noted it clearly in the quote. The roof was leaking directly onto a 240-volt cable run. If it wasn't repaired before the next rainy season, I'll be blunt, the risk of electrical fire was real. Alex said thank you, hung up, looked at the 2 documents sitting side by side on the table. The fire investigation report, the denied roof repair application. Alex didn't need a lawyer to read what happened next. And this is the moment Alex had to decide. Can you picture it? Sitting in the kitchen at midnight, 2 sheets of paper in front of you, coffee long gone cold. You know what you're holding might be significant. You know what it could do. But you also know that once you step in, there's no stepping back. What would you do? Close the binder, tuck it in a drawer, Keep living your normal life? Or start knocking on doors? Alex started knocking on doors. First knock. Carol, the neighbor right next to the Thompson house, lived on Maplewood for 14 years. Alex sat in Carol's kitchen, drank unsweetened tea, and waited. Carol knew about the roof, about the fines, about the 2 years Margaret had been calling code enforcement before the HOA even existed. Carol looked down at her tea. I have a pending violation. Fence height. I was afraid if I spoke up, she'd come after me next. Second knock. Jim, across the street, retired electrician. Jim knew about the September roof application. He'd happened to see it when Dan Thompson brought it over for his opinion before submitting. Jim confirmed the contractor's risk assessment was accurate. He didn't co-sign it, didn't say anything more. I've got my own dispute going with the HOA over my fence. I didn't want to get dragged into another one. That's how silence works. Not out of malice, not out of indifference, just because the weight of personal consequences presses down until the impulse to say something passes. And the Thompsons paid for that silence with everything they had. Alex documented it all. Names, dates, reasons, filed it in a folder. Then asked Carol one more question, not expecting much. Have any other neighbors gone through something similar? Carol stared at her tea, then said 2 family names. The Garcias. Lorenzo, his wife Mia, 2 young kids, moved to Maplewood in January 2 years ago. 8 months later, they sold. Not because they wanted to, because 27 violation notices in 8 months is more than any ordinary family can take. Same types of violations, same language in the notices. Eyesore, blight, same signature. The Moores, Sandra and Greg Moore, came after the Garcias. 14 months. Sold at an $18,000 loss below market value. The reason, in an email Sandra Moore sent Carol before leaving. I can't sleep anymore because I keep wondering what I'm in violation of. The Thompsons were the 3rd target, and the first who didn't leave on their own. Margaret Voss didn't have one bad day and say something she didn't mean. She had a system. 47 days before the annual HOA meeting, Alex started knocking on doors, one house at a time, carrying nothing but a single sheet of paper and the facts. This is what the HOA records show. This is what the fire report says. This is the roof repair application that was denied 1 month before the fire. I'm not asking you to do anything. I just want you to know. Neighbors read it, then asked, "Where do I sign?" Some signed without a question. Some signed and stood still for a moment, eyes still on the page. Some even called back the next morning to share more about the Garcias, things they'd known but no one had ever asked about. 21 days, 50 signatures, then 57, then 61. When the number of proxy votes exceeded 74% of total residents, enough to trigger a vote of no confidence under HOA bylaws, Alex sat down with the 4 other board members. The meeting they quietly prepared wasn't on Margaret's agenda. She would find out when it began. 74% proxy votes, 61 households out of 83. From the first signature to reaching the threshold, 21 days. That meeting had a winner before Margaret tapped the microphone. And Carol and Jim, the 2 who'd stayed silent for a year, had just submitted sworn written statements. Both had their names on them. Both had dates. The annual HOA meeting of Maplewood Drive, community room, folding chairs, a whiteboard, plastic water cups on the chairman's table. Previous years, this meeting drew 10, maybe 12 people. Tonight, 63 residents. Chairs ran out. People stood along the walls. Someone brought in extra chairs from the hallway. Margaret walked in at 5 to 7. Navy dress, clipboard, the smile she'd perfected over 7 annual meetings. She scanned the room. More people than usual, but not unheard of. Last year's budget meeting had been this packed too. She sat down in the chair, opened her binder, reviewed the agenda. Nothing out of the ordinary. The usual agenda. Approved minutes, financial report, landscaping update. 3 items. 7 years. Never a 4th. She tapped the microphone. Let's get started. The first 20 minutes passed normally. Minutes approved. Financial report presented. Margaret took notes in her steady hand, voice controlled, passing the pen to board members for signatures in the exact prescribed order. The only tell that she was reading the room, the way her fingers never left the pen, even when she wasn't writing anything. Then came item 4, not on the agenda. Alex stood up. I'd like to propose an off-agenda item under Bylaw 14.2, the right of a board member to raise an urgent matter before the General Assembly. Margaret looked up. The first time all evening she looked directly at Alex. Bylaw 14.2 requires 48 hours prior notice. Bylaw 14.2b waives prior notice if the matter concerns potential legal liability for the organization. Alex placed a dossier on the table, quite thick, red clip. The bylaw permits a board member to raise an urgent issue before all residents without prior notice if it involves legal risk. And I believe this qualifies. The room went silent. Not a single person looked at their phone. Margaret held her smile, but the pen in her hand stopped moving. Fine. Board Member Petrov, please take notes on this section. Alex opened the dossier. First page, 31 violation notices against the Thompsons, printed in chronological order, neatly formatted. A frequency analysis of fines by month, with a note, October, the month Lisa Thompson had her appendectomy, had 5 fines in 2 weeks. Over 18 months, the Thompson family received a total of 31 violation notices. This is an unusually high frequency compared to the neighborhood average. However, this is not the issue I wish to raise. Second page, the roof repair application. The original, pale yellow, the red stamp still crisp. On September 14th, Mr. Dan Thompson submitted a request for roof repair approval, accompanied by a $4,200 quote, accompanied by photographs of the damaged area and the contractor's risk assessment, which explicitly stated risk of electrical fire if not repaired before rainy season. Alex turned the form to face the room. The room saw the red stamp. The application was denied on September 21st. Reason: does not meet aesthetic standards. Signature authorizing the denial: Mrs. Margaret Voss. Third page, page 6 of the fire investigation report, the bolded paragraph. On October 22nd, 29 days after the roof repair application was denied, the house at 14 Maplewood Drive caught fire. The investigation report determined ignition source at the northeast roof section, long-term water infiltration corroding wire insulation. Not a heavy breath in the room. Alex set the dossier down, didn't close it. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not standing here to accuse anyone. I'm standing here as a board member to inform you that there is a possibility that the Maplewood Drive HOA is facing legal liability related to the denial of a repair application with documented risk, and I recommend the board consult legal counsel immediately. Margaret stared straight at Alex, clipboard in hand, pen still held. She opened her mouth. This is a baseless accusation. We have a clear approval process. Every application goes through the same set of criteria. Aesthetics is a valid criterion. Bylaw 7.4 allows it explicitly. I'm not making an accusation. Alex, calm. I'm reporting a legal risk. This is a board member's obligation under the charter. A board member, seated to Margaret's left, named Peters, set down his pen, looked at the dossier, then looked at Margaret, said nothing. But that look said enough. The room was silent for 3 seconds, 4 seconds, the hum of the air conditioning. Margaret looked at the dossier on the table, looked at the red stamp on the application facing outward, her signature, unmistakable under the meeting room lights. Looked at the 63 people in the room. She looked down at her binder, turned to a new page. Blank. Then, from the back of the room, Carol stood up. She held a sheet of paper. I'd like to read my statement. Her voice trembled slightly, but she stood straight. I knew about the Thompsons' roof repair application. I knew since September, and I didn't speak up. I'm sorry for that. Jim stood up from the opposite row, no paper in hand. I looked at the application before Dan submitted it. I confirmed the risk assessment was accurate. I didn't speak up either. The room looked at Margaret. She set the clipboard down, gently, not a sound. Alex looked straight at her. Nothing more to add. No need. The vote of no confidence against HOA President Margaret Voss was conducted under Bylaw 9.4, requiring 74% proxy votes. Sufficient votes had been submitted in advance. Result: 79% in favor. Margaret heard the results announced. She didn't stand up right away, sat for another moment, then stood, picked up the clipboard, walked out the side door. Didn't look back. Didn't slam it shut. The door closed. Silence. That was the last time Margaret Voss sat in the chair. And in the silence after the door closed, Alex remembered what she'd said the night of the fire, standing before the still glowing wreckage, voice as light as if commenting on the weather. That eyesore is finally gone. She was right about one thing. The eyesore was gone, just not the one she'd had in mind. 1 week after the meeting, the interim board sent a letter to the Thompson family. All $3,400 in fines were voided and refunded. Enclosed, a formal apology from the HOA, signed by all 4 remaining board members. Lisa Thompson read the apology letter twice, then folded it, set it on the table. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The HOA contributed to a community fund for the Thompson family, $12,000 from reserve funds. The following month, neighbors on the street organized an additional donation drive. No one issued a formal call. People just showed up. Total, $67,000. Enough for the Thompsons to put a down payment on a new home. Dan Thompson called Alex one evening. Didn't say much. I don't know what to say other than thank you. Then, Biscuit wants to see you. And Biscuit, the chubby golden dog with big floppy ears, trembling in Alex's arms the night of the fire, 9 months later became the first living thing to run through the front door of the Thompsons' new house on Elm Street. Wooden door, small yard. And on the front wall, the color the family chose, deep cobalt blue, the color the HOA once denied, the color Dan had wanted since the day he bought his first home. No one fined them this time. Margaret Voss sold her house on Maplewood Drive 3 months after resigning. Sold quickly, below market value. The house was bought by a young couple with a golden retriever and a first child on the way. The first thing they did after getting the keys, repainted the mailbox. Warm, earthy yellow. No one checked the color code. The Maplewood Drive neighborhood now has a new clause in the HOA meeting minutes, passed in December. Repair applications citing documented safety risks shall be prioritized and processed within 7 business days. No application shall be denied on aesthetic grounds if a contractor confirms a safety risk. The person who proposed it, Alex. Second to sign, Carol. Third, Jim. Some people look at a neighborhood and see color palettes, fence heights, tree branches extending 6 inches past the line. And some people look and see a family trying to hold on to something they spent 7 years earning. Margaret Voss looked at the Thompson house and saw an eyesore. 31 violation notices and 1 red stamp later, she still saw an eyesore. But the night of the fire, Biscuit, in the arms of a neighbor, fur damp with smoke, looked up at her and turned away. Biscuit didn't know anything about color codes or neighborhood aesthetics. He just knew which side everyone was on. If you've ever lived under an HOA that made you feel like you were slowly being squeezed out, drop a comment. Tell me about it. I read every one.